November 1st, 1942. 0547 hours. Jungle perimeter, 2 kilometers south of Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Takeshi Hayashi wiped the condensation from his vision port with a grimy cloth, squinting through the narrow slit at the wall of green vegetation ahead. Inside the cramped hull of his Type 95 Hago light tank, the air hung thick with the smell of oil, gunpowder residue, and 4 unwashed men crammed into a space barely larger than a telephone booth. The engine rumbled beneath him, a reassuring mechanical heartbeat that had carried his crew through China, Malaya, and now into this godforsaken jungle island in the middle of nowhere. "Movement ahead, Lieutenant," whispered Corporal Nakamura from the driver's position, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. 300 meters, jungle break. Hayashi pressed his face closer to the viewport. Through the steam rising from the morning jungle floor, he could make out shapes. Vehicles, definitely American, moving with the cautious deliberation of an advancing column. Perfect. The trap was set exactly as Colonel Sumiyoshi had planned. 14. Type 95 tanks concealed in the thick undergrowth, engines idling, crews at the ready. The Americans would march right into their kill zone, and then Imperial Steel would teach them the price of challenging Japanese armor. Behind Hayashi, loader Private Sato shifted nervously, his hand resting on one of the 37mm armor-piercing rounds stacked like cordwood in the ammunition rack. "Sir, what if the intelligence reports were wrong? What if those are—" "Silence," Hayashi hissed, not harshly, but firmly. He understood the boy's anxiety. They all did. For weeks, scattered reports had filtered through command about new American tanks arriving on the island. Bigger tanks, heavier tanks. But Hayashi had dismissed such talk as the usual fog of war exaggeration. American tanks were known quantities. The M3 Stuarts they'd encountered before were jokes. Little more than armored cars with delusions of grandeur. Japanese Type 95s had destroyed them with ease in every engagement. Why would these new machines be any different? The Hago rocked slightly as Nakamura adjusted their position, angling the 37mm main gun toward the clearing. Hayashi ran through the familiar calculations in his mind. Engage at close range, where their gun was most effective. Aim for tracks or side armor. Use speed and maneuverability to flank the slower American vehicles. The Type 95 wasn't the most heavily armored tank in the world. Its maximum armor thickness was barely 12mm, but it was fast, reliable, and had proven itself in combat from Manchuria to the Philippines. More importantly, it was crewed by men who had trained for this exact moment. Through the viewport, the American column grew closer. Hayashi could hear them now, the deep, throated rumble of diesel engines, the clank and squeal of tracks crushing vegetation, voices shouting orders in English. His hand moved to the radio transmitter. One word from him, and 14 tanks would open fire simultaneously. But then the lead American vehicle emerged fully from the jungle shadow into a shaft of early morning sunlight, and Lieutenant Takeshi Hayashi felt his confidence waver for the first time in 3 years of tank warfare. The machine that rolled into view was massive. Not massive in the way a building or a ship is massive, but massive in a way that made his Type 95 suddenly feel like a child's toy. It was taller, wider, longer. Its turret alone looked larger than his entire tank. The armor plating caught the light with a dull, matte finish that spoke of thickness, of substance, of metal that would not yield easily. The long barrel of its main gun swept slowly across the jungle perimeter, like the head of a hunting predator. Jesus and Buddha, Corporal Nakamura breathed, abandoning all military protocol. "What is that thing?" Hayashi didn't answer. He was too busy staring at the white star painted on the American tank's hull, at the angular, purposeful lines of its construction, at the way it moved through the jungle terrain with an almost contemptuous ease. Behind it, more of the same machines emerged from the green tunnel. 5, 6, 7 of them, each one a steel fortress on tracks. His hand hovered over the radio transmitter. The ambush was ready. The moment was now. But something in Hayashi's combat-hardened instincts screamed a warning that no amount of training or doctrine could silence. These were not M3 Stuarts. These were M4 Shermans, and everything was about to change. Hayashi's mind raced backward through 6 months of briefings, intelligence reports, and the absolute certainty that had been drilled into every Japanese tank officer from Hokkaido to Kyushu. The Americans, they had been told, were mechanically proficient, but tactically naive. Their industrial capacity was vast. Yes, but quantity could never substitute for the warrior spirit, for the years of combat experience that Japanese armored units carried like badges of honor. He remembered the lecture hall at the Armored Warfare School in Chiba, September 1941, where Major Watanabe had stood before a wall-sized map of the Pacific and declared with absolute conviction, "The Americans build their tanks like they build their automobiles, soft, comfortable, and unsuited for real war. Our Type 95 and Type 97 tanks embody the samurai spirit, fast, aggressive, and wielded by superior men." The other officers had nodded in agreement. Why wouldn't they? Every piece of evidence supported the assessment. In China, Japanese tanks had crushed nationalist resistance. In Malaya and the Philippines, they had swept British and American forces aside like paper. The few encounters with American M3 Stuart light tanks had been laughably one-sided. Japanese 37mm guns had punched through their thin armor, while American 37mm rounds had bounced harmlessly off Japanese tanks at anything beyond point-blank range. Hayashi himself had destroyed 2 Stuarts outside Manila. He remembered the satisfaction of watching his armor-piercing round punch through the American tank's side armor, the way smoke had poured from its hatches as the crew bailed out. Easy kills. Target practice. The Americans had fought bravely. He gave them that. But courage without proper equipment was just another word for suicide. But standing in his cramped command position now, watching this new American tank roll closer with every passing second, Hayashi felt the first cold fingers of doubt wrapping around his certainty. The Sherman's dimensions alone violated everything he'd been taught about American armor philosophy. It stood at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. A massive target, yes, but also a platform that could depress its gun into hull-down positions Japanese tanks could never achieve. Its tracks were wider, distributing weight more effectively across the muddy jungle floor. And that gun. Even from 300 meters away, Hayashi could see that the main gun was substantially larger than anything he'd encountered before. "Sir," Gunner Sergeant Ito's voice cut through his thoughts, steady but urgent. "Range 280 meters. Permission to—" "Hold fire," Hayashi ordered, his voice sharper than intended. He needed to think. The doctrine was clear. Engage American armor at close range, where the Type 95's maneuverability could compensate for its lighter armament. But doctrine assumed rough parity in capability. What if the intelligence had been catastrophically wrong? What if these Shermans were actually— The radio crackled to life. Colonel Sumiyoshi's voice tense with barely controlled excitement. All units. American armor column confirmed. 14 vehicles, heavy type. Execute attack plan immediately. Banzai for the Emperor." Around Hayashi's position, the jungle erupted with the roar of 13 other Type 95 engines, revving to combat power. Through the thick vegetation, he could see Lieutenant Endo's tank lurching forward 30 meters to his left. its 37mm gun already traversing toward the lead Sherman. Further right, Captain Yoshida's command tank broke from concealment, tracks churning mud as it accelerated toward the American column. There was no more time for doubt, no more room for hesitation. The attack was launched, the ambush sprung. 14 Type 95 tanks against 7 American Shermans in close terrain, where Japanese speed and numbers should, theoretically, provide the advantage. "Driver, forward," Hayashi commanded, his training overriding his instincts. "Gunner, target the lead vehicle, left side armor, 300 meters." The Heigo surged forward, engine screaming as Nakamura pushed the accelerator to the floor. Vegetation scraped and tore at the tank's thin armor plating as they burst from concealment. Through the vision port, Hayashi saw the entire battlefield materialize in terrifying clarity. Japanese tanks emerging from multiple positions, creating a perfect encirclement. The American column, caught in the open clearing, beginning to react with the practiced efficiency of trained crews. "On target," Sergeant Ito shouted. "Fire!" The 37mm gun barked, the recoil rocking the entire Heigo on its suspension. Hayashi watched the tracer arc across the clearing in a flat trajectory, watched it strike the lead Sherman side armor just below the turret ring, the exact spot where Japanese doctrine said American tanks were most vulnerable. The armor-piercing round hit with a bright spark of impact, and then, impossibly, it ricocheted upward into the jungle canopy, with a metallic whine that Hayashi felt in his bones. "No penetration," Ito's voice carried disbelief. "Sir, no penetration." Across the clearing, Hayashi saw the same scene repeated 5, 6, 7 times. Japanese rounds striking Sherman armor with precise accuracy, and every single one bouncing off like pebbles thrown against a castle wall. The distinctive crack of Type 95 guns echoed through the jungle, but the American tanks rolled forward, untouched, unharmed. The Sherman's turret began to traverse, slowly, deliberately. The long barrel of its 75mm gun swinging toward Lieutenant Endo's Hago with the inevitability of death itself. And in that moment, Lieutenant Takeshi Hayashi understood with perfect clarity that Japanese tank doctrine hadn't just been wrong. It had been catastrophically, fatally wrong. The 37mm rounds bounced harmlessly off Sherman armor. Japanese tank crews watched in horror as their most powerful weapons failed at point-blank range. In just 4 minutes, 14 Type 95 Heigo tanks were destroyed. 53 men dead. And the Americans hadn't lost a single Sherman. Lieutenant Hayashi had survived the impossible, but the real battle was just beginning. The Shermans weren't stopping. They were advancing deeper into Japanese lines, and now Hayashi had to warn his command about an enemy they had no way to fight. The doctrine was wrong. The intelligence was wrong. Everything the Japanese army believed about American armor was catastrophically wrong. What happened next would change the course of tank warfare in the Pacific forever. The Japanese would be forced to develop entirely new tactics. Desperate, brutal tactics that would cost hundreds of lives just to stop a single Sherman. In Part 2, we'll witness 1. The desperate race to warn Japanese forces before the Shermans reach their positions. 2. The birth of suicide anti-tank tactics born from pure desperation. 3. The brutal reality of close assault teams facing 30-ton steel monsters, and the final evacuation that would force Japan to completely rethink their armor doctrine. The jungle at Guadalcanal had become a proving ground, and Japanese tank crews were paying the price for their command's miscalculations. Don't miss Part 2 to see how this David versus Goliath battle concludes, and how the lessons learned here would echo across every Pacific battlefield for the rest of the war. If you want to see the conclusion of this story, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Could Japanese forces have done anything differently? What would you do if you realized your weapons couldn't hurt the enemy? The Sherman had arrived in the Pacific, and nothing would ever be the same. See you in part 2.